after the official time. Welcome, everybody. I am Bertrand de la Chapelle. I'm the Chief Vision Officer of the Datasphere Initiative. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this new installment of this series, Let's Talk About Data and AI, that the Datasphere Initiative is organizing in partnership with D4D Networks and the Global Index on Responsible AI. And this one is dedicated particularly to the trends and challenges in Asia, after two other sessions in covering Latin America and Africa. As I said, and I repeat, please introduce yourself in the chat. If you can activate your video, it's always nicer to have people visible and to be able to interact. And it's a pleasure to have you. And as you know, this is going to be this is being recorded, and it will be available on the YouTube channel of the Datasphere Initiative. So before we start, as a matter of introduction, a little bit of stepping back and presenting the context and the general landscape. Some of you may not be familiar with the Datasphere Initiative, so maybe it's important to mention something briefly about this initiative. We're a foundation based in Switzerland, and the starting point of this initiative was the realization that, in a nutshell, in addition to the traditional spheres that we're familiar with in the climate environment, like the atmosphere, the lithosphere, the hydrosphere, or the biosphere, we have, with the revolution of the digital age, created a sort of fifth sphere, which we call the data sphere, which is basically the complex system that organizes the interaction between the enormous amount of data that we are producing on a constant basis at incredible speeds today and volumes, all the tools and the people who actually create, aggregate, process, make accessible, or use this data. And a third dimension, which is all the different norms, private and public, that organize the interactions and the rules about this use of data in various forms. And of course, in this environment, there's an enormous importance to how data is being used in the context of artificial intelligence development and incredible acceleration of progress. We believe very strongly that this data sphere is a complex dynamic system, and that AI has a strong impact on the trajectory of this and the dynamic of this data sphere, because AI depends upon data in terms of access, and not only data sharing, but also all the modalities of data access. But it is also producing an enormous amount of data, and it will produce an increasing amount of data, which will continue to feed this data sphere in ways that are extremely difficult to anticipate. And so the reason why we wanted to initiate those sessions is because we believe that while we're talking a lot about the governance of AI, which is an extremely important topic, it is important as well to address the question of the governance of data, because one shapes the others. And regarding data and regarding the governance of data, the Datasphere Initiative has produced a few papers, and one of the things that we want to highlight and that I want to share at the beginning of this session is that in terms of governance of AI, we're often presented with a very simple alternative between protection and openness. Protection for many reasons. It can be for privacy protection, it can be for intellectual property, it can be for security reasons, all very valid questions. At the same time, there are many trends and pressures to have openness of data so that this data can be used for various purposes, and in particular for the training of AI. But we believe that this dichotomy is too simplistic, and that there are many cases where the protection is, if not excessive, at least reducing the capacity to create value out of data in responsible manner. And that likewise, not all data should be open without any conditions. Some should, but some should be with conditions on how it is being used. And so the mission of the Datasphere Initiative is to explore this zone in the middle, what we jokingly call the Goldilocks zone. The story of Goldilocks and the three bears with the food that is too hot, too cold, but just right, or with the right measure. And here's the same. Between protections and openness, there is a space that we intend to focus on in order to, and this is the mission of the Datasphere Initiative, help responsibly unlock the value of data for all. And this goes through a certain number of developments, particularly because we believe that there is a need for agile frameworks to responsibly unlock this value of data for all. And an example, or a few examples of this notion of the Goldilocks zone, you can apply it as a conceptual framework for a lot of things. The rules that will apply to personal data for AI training, the same for the rules that will apply for copyrighted content, for instance, for AI training. But it is also potentially applicable in the context of AI regarding open sourcing or very proprietary models. And likewise, the speed of development, where there is this whole debate about very polarized positions between unrestricted speed and something that is akin to an arms race, technological arms race. And on the other hand, people will encourage or ask for a pause or waiting. And if you think about it, most of those issues and a lot of the issues regarding AI and AI governance can be in a certain way framed in this sort of Goldilocks approach of avoiding too much or too little of anything. And framing is extremely important. And as a starting point for this meeting and the different interventions, I want to share a few things that underpin the whole activity and the reason why we organize these sessions. As I said, framing is essential. And there is a tendency and a risk, particularly when we're talking about regulation or when we're talking about policy making, to rush towards confronting alternative solutions without dedicating enough time to the very early agenda setting and issue framing phase. And this is part of what we want to contribute to, because asking the right questions is a huge portion of reaching the right solutions. And I think at the moment, there's not sufficient clarity about what are the right questions. And part of the work that we're trying to do is to identify them. The second thing is that we strongly believe that this is a global and transnational problem, something that will not be restricted to any specific country or any specific type of actors, and that this requires a systemic and holistic approach to those questions of governance, be it governance of data or governance of AI, and the two are intertwined very closely. The other thing is that there is no way to find solutions to the question of the governance of AI without a close communication, coordination, and cooperation between different types of stakeholders. It requires a joint effort and a shared responsibility by governments of all sorts, by companies, both developers and users of AI, and civil society actors and international organizations, to address those issues in a way that is coordinated, not necessarily to prevent multiple actors to address the same issues, but to make sure that they are not addressing this in ways that are incompatible. And finally, when we talk about governance, there's always a connection to regulation. And the traditional way of doing regulation is what I often call, jokingly, fire and forget regulation. Like you spend X number of years trying to find the right regulation in one particular country. And then you expect that this regulation, once adopted, will last for at least a few years, if not decades. This is not the way it's going to work for those technologies that change at an incredible speed, that impact people and the planet in general, but people across borders, because the decisions that are made in one country have serious consequences for other regions. And sometimes the decisions are voluntarily extraterritorial. So we need what we call agile framework to explore new ways, more innovative ways to do regulation or to organize the governance. This goes in particular, for instance, around exploring how we can use sandboxes to provide experimental spaces. It can be for red teaming, for instance, the development of AI, but also the development of what we call charters or protocols for cooperations around data sharing or data access, particularly when we are using certain types of technologies that help solve the problems of protection of personal data or business information, such as privacy enhancing techniques or what some people call partnership enhancing techniques like homomorphic encryption or federated learning. So these are the backgrounds upon which we have decided to start this series of discussions. And so in conclusion, and as an opening to the work, what we're trying to do here is to open the space for dialogue, not only as capacity building, but also to get all the different perspectives. Because we need to take into account the perspectives of the different regions of the world, of the different categories of actors, for several reasons. And I can quickly share three. One, because it's a matter of inclusion. Some of the decisions that are going to be taken in developed countries, and namely in the United States, in China, or in Europe, will impact countries that have at the moment very little say in the decisions that are being made. So it's a matter of responsibility for those who develop this and develop the regulations and the technology. It is also a matter of pragmatism, because it is at the moment a race, both on the regulatory front and on the technological front. And we need to make sure that all the actors who have a weight, particularly the large ones, in those decisions, are around the table, or at least that their perspectives are taken into account. Because the third point, and the most important one, I think, is that it is an existential question for humanity as a whole. It is a truly civilizational set of questions that we have. And the way we will organize this need to take into account the different perspectives, the different cultures, the different philosophies that are related to what makes humanity work and coexist. And I think it is a matter of respect for the different perspectives to have those different perspectives. With that, this is the reason why we are doing those series. We had two previous ones regarding Latin America and Africa. And I'm very happy to pass the baton to Arindrajit Basu, now who will moderate the session. I thank you very much for participating in this meeting, and I'm looking forward to listening to what you have to share. Arindrajit, your turn.
Thanks a lot, Bertrand, for first for having to Datasphere Initiative for having me, and to Bertrand, of course, for those really rich set of opening remarks, which I will pick up on in a bit. To quickly introduce myself, I am presently a PhD candidate at Leiden University. I work broadly on sovereignty in cyberspace. I'm also working with the United Nations Development Program on digitalization, human rights, and security. And I was, of course, last year, I had a great time as a fellow with the Datasphere Initiative. So I got to learn a lot about this, thinking about the data space as a sphere and an adaptive system, which really shaped my research and thinking. So really looking forward to this discussion. Couple of very quick framing remarks before I go to the fantastic lineup that we have. actually drawing from a couple of things that Bertrand said. One is this: we are now, fortunately or unfortunately, policy discourse around the world often is shaped by a hype cycle, and we are very much right now in the AI hype cycle, thanks to the kind of existential risk framing that came maybe last year. And in some ways, this hype cycle has, for a little bit at least, caused some of us to, not the Datasphere Initiative, but some of us to maybe forget the data governance that is really at the root of AI or responsible AI challenges. And with that in mind, actually wanted to point to recent success, which actually links responsible AI with data governance, which is a United Nations General Assembly resolution. It's number A78L49, sponsored, brokered by the US, but sponsored by a number of different countries: Brazil, Bulgaria, Morocco, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates. So, and it was kind of adopted by consensus. So everyone, actually, no one objected to it. And that actually is a resolution on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development of AI systems. But the operative clause 7 of that particular resolution actually explicitly recognizes that data is fundamental to the development and operation of artificial intelligence systems, and actually does encourage member states to share best practices on data governance. So that is, even at the global level, a very clear link being drawn, as Bertrand was saying, between data governance and responsible AI systems. And that's at the root of what we are trying to do today as well. And of course, this also speaks to another point that Bertrand made, that this is very much is a global challenge, and it should be a global and transnational solution. So without further ado, about this panel, I think the goal is twofold. One is to, of course, get a sense of what's happening in Asia, and also to get, as Bertrand was saying, perspectives from practitioners and experts based in Asia on what is happening, what is happening around the world. So we have a great set of panelists that will help us do that. So how it's going to work is, it'll be about a 1 hour panel discussion. Each panelist will weigh in for about 5 minutes or so. I will introduce each panelist before I turn a question to them, and then hopefully we'll have some time for an open discussion for at least 15 to 20 minutes. So let me start with Amor. Amor, to quickly introduce her, and I think there was also she also has kind of provided a lot of background to her work in the chat, so I encourage you to check that out as well. But to quickly kind of introduce her, she's a globally award-winning fintech leader, brand architect, and a movement maker. She is the market with the convener of Digital Filipinas and the founding member of the International Digital Economies Association. She's also the convener of the Digital ASEAN, the Asia chairman of the Global FinTech Alliance, the chair of the Philippines Global Tech Advocates, and the co-founder of Astrolab. So a lot of different hats that Amor is wearing. And so, really ideal person to maybe kind of give us some broad, from the drawing from the many different hats, and of course from the framing you provided in the very powerful framing about the global majority. If you could just provide some broad comments to start us off on why data governance is crucial for artificial intelligence from the perspective of various stakeholders, and especially maybe from the perspective of the global majority. So over to you, Amor. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rachit Ji, and good afternoon to everyone. I am right now currently calling from Manila. Maybe to give you a little bit of background, the International Digital Economies Association is a coming together of 40 digital economy leaders across a global majority. So to many of you, you probably know it as a global south, but many of us reject the labeling and call ourselves the global majority. We recently had our offsite, of which I actually invited Justine, but he was unable to come, in Dubai. I think why this is very important is because I would like to see a couple of ideas that could be a jumping board for discussion. Before we can even perhaps talk about data governance, I'd like to put forth the idea of data ownership. So one of the things that I think is problematic in Southeast Asia or in what you term as the global south is the fact that most of the people do not own their own data. There are actually certain regions and jurisdictions in Southeast Asia wherein would you believe that you would have to pay $3 per page of your own bank data, so you can actually use it to access other types of financial services, right? You probably think that that's a horror story, but it's actually happening right now. Big financial institutions like banks refuse to relinquish the ownership of data to the people who actually own them. We purport that the reason why most of the global majority is poor is not because there's no wealth. It's because we don't own our data. What does data ownership mean? Our ability to be able to define, monetize, modify our own data to suit our purposes. And unfortunately, that is still not happening in our region. So that's the first, from data governance to data ownership. The second item that I think would be interesting for all of us to discuss and for us to hear on is, are we using AI for interventions that really benefit those in the global south? So I'll tell you a characteristic of us in Southeast Asia. Most of us are net borrowers. So creating greater access to lending is actually one of the most outstanding uses for AI and data ownership and data governance. The second would be in agriculture. We are primarily agriculture. And the third one will be in healthcare, right? So those are the three areas that we hope to hear. I'd like to hear case studies from other regions in Asia. I cannot help but mention that one of the leaders in the Asia Pacific for data ownership and data governance is India. So the Aadhaar, which is a digital identity in India, is something that is widely exported globally, including that of the Philippines. So I needed to put that out. They even have a technology, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, called the Digital Locker Authority. So it's literally a locker that would allow for people to store their data and unlock it to whoever or sell it to whoever they please. Last but not the least, that I'm very mindful of would be, how do we make sure that there are enough data points coming from the global majority and from Asia? We know that the one biggest challenge of AI is the fact that he who holds the data points hold the narrative, right? Or the bias, so to speak. And that is why I think the most important introduction to what we do is the fact that we have recently signed as the Asia Pacific partner of the Datasphere Initiative. I had actually met the incredible people from this organization when we were in South Africa last December, when India handed over the presidency to Brazil. And I was absolutely in love with the idea of a global sandbox initiative. Last April, I presented this to the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, who's very interested to be a convergence point and to be a partner for converging all the sandboxes, not just in fintech, in Asia Pacific. So I'm incredibly proud to be part of this initiative, and I look forward to working with many of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Amor. And I know that you have to leave in another 45 minutes or so. So we'll try and come back to you as soon as possible. Thanks for a really rich set of remarks. I think the comment about data ownership as in many ways a substitute for or a synonym for data autonomy, right? In terms of being able to control and modify it as you wish. And if that's not happening, then that's a pretty fundamental problem. And also this characterization of the agency of the global majority, both in the terms of how we phrase the common identifier, whether it's the global south or the global majority, but also the agency that some of these countries have through the presidency of the G20 and so on. So if I can turn to Vineet now, who is the regional advisor for social and human sciences at the UNESCO regional office in Bangkok. He is a philosopher by by training, and his fields of specialization are comparative philosophy, ethics, and cultural studies. His work focuses on the ethics of science and technology, social inclusion and human rights, gender equality, youth civic participation, and intercultural dialogue. He joined the UNESCO headquarters of Paris in 2007 under the Philosophy, Democracy, and Human Security program. So, Vineet, same question. If I can turn to you, but from what is the international organization UN perspective, and also if you can bring in some of your kind of disciplinary expertise on how this maybe corresponds to some thinking on ethics and philosophy, that will be great. If you could take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Basu, for your moderation and introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'd like also to thank you for quoting the recent General Assembly resolution on AI. And I have to say that we are very glad at UNESCO that the ethical framework that member states of UNESCO, meaning 193 member states, have adopted the ethical principles regarding to AI back in 2021. And let me just say why it is important. I think it is, to put it short, I often say that it is important because AI can calculate magnificently, but it cannot understand. And this is really the turning point where I believe the youth and young people in Asia needs to understand more and more, is that while AI can help them to calculate and to triangulate information and to gather information and sometimes to analyze information to some extent, it cannot understand the human subtleties, the human relationship and cultures and cultural norms and practices. So for us at UNESCO, it is very important to stress on the fact that ethics is made necessary because the technology can calculate but cannot understand. Now, moving forwards, I'd like also to emphasize that data governance is extremely important because I think we are facing what some have called technological solutionism, meaning the belief that to all our problems, we just need to click on some random applications that everything would be solved. And I think that is something that is extremely important for us to tackle, to unpack, and also to sensitize the new generations on, to avoid that kind of naive technological solutionism. Let me end by saying, in complement to what Amor has already said from Asia Pacific, from the global south or global majority, I like the term. Let me just say why it is important for Asia Pacific in particular. You know that according to many projections, by 2040, the economy of Asia Pacific will represent more than 50% of the global GDP. And I think Bertrand has already mentioned the very rapidly growing economy for the last decades in this particular region, and that should continue even though with some a little bit less than the rate that we've known so far, but the growth is continuing. And the pace of growth of the economy here, including the e-economy in Southeast Asia and Asia in general, will be an important factor. Now, I'd like to put against that trend what UNESCO has looked into in 2019. We have conducted a survey and a study in Southeast Asia to look at how the education curriculum and program are framed in Southeast Asia, in Asia Pacific. And one of the findings is that we found that the program, the manuals, are disseminating or instilling what we call ethno-cultural essentialism. That means that our education system is still building the narrative about we and them. We are this, they are that, and our identity is this, their identity is that. And that kind of narrative is something that could be potentially expanded and I would say, multiplied by a mismanagement of data when it comes to AI digitalization. So I think I'm pointing these two factors, economic growth, but extremely conservative and traditional way of teaching, which then leads me to say that it is important for us to really make sure that the understanding of AI and new technologies is addressed in the sense of critical thinking. We need to enforce our education system to make sure that our young population understands what they can expect from the technology and what they cannot, but to exercise their own critical thinking to assess the situation and to use the technology wisely. So I think, let me just stress by saying in Asia Pacific, it is extremely important that we also reform the education system to align with the pace of development of the new technologies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vineet, for those rich set of very diverse remarks as well. I've linked in the chat. I've linked to the UNESCO webpage on the range of AI initiatives. Please do share any other resources, Vineet, that I may have missed out. But thanks for also introducing a number of very important concepts that I hope we'll come back to: technological solutionism, the importance of critical thinking in education. So yeah, I think those are important framing concepts, which I hope we can come back to. I'm turning next to Wayne, who is a non-resident fellow at FGV Rio. He's a PhD candidate in law and technology at the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong, and he's the admin coordinator at Creative Commons of Hong Kong. So again, a number of different hats. So from both maybe from a legal and academic perspective, turning the same question to you, what is the connection between data governance and artificial intelligence? What are some of the legal frameworks that you see maybe are evolving, and what is your overall kind of research interest in some of these things? So over to you, Wayne. Really great to have you with us.
Thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation from the Datasphere Initiative. And yes, I think I've already been inspired by the previous two speakers and panelists. In terms of, for example, global majority and the digital literacy and AI in education. In terms of the global majority, actually, because I'm part of the dynamic coalition on data and AI governance at the United Nations International Governance Forum, and this year it will be held at the Middle East, and we will have a kind of event on the data and AI governance in the global majority. I mean, precisely the name. So. Titled like this. So please stay tuned with us as well. I mean, in terms of the question, I think for sure, I fully agree that data governance is a foundation upon which trustworthy and responsible AI is built upon. And from a lawyer's perspective or legal perspective, we have to for sure ensure the data quality, for example, even integrity and privacy. And for some specific, Asia jurisdictions, we're also concerned about this cybersecurity, for example, or data security. Or generally the security of the data used to train AI models. In this case, we have to present biases, inaccuracies, or even misuse. Generally, in Asia, I think data governance is particularly important as almost the whole region rapidly adopts AI across different across different sectors. Like previous panelists already mentioned the healthcare or finance, fintech area, and even public services in the private sector or e-government or something. In this regard, on the other hand, with the increasing introduction of data protection or privacy law, like in China, we have the personal information protection law, and India, passed the PDP as well. In this regards, entities probably will have to do a lot of compliance work. To align their AI practice with the evolving and the dynamic, fast-changing regulations. But moreover, Asia's rich diversity also poses some quite a few challenges for AI governance. For example, ensuring that AI systems are inclusive and produce equitable outcomes for all segments of the population requires a careful attention to data collection, processing, and usage practices. I mean, in terms of both personal data and non-personal data. But but by implementing robust data governance framework that account for the regions, for example, linguistic, cultural, or even demographic diversity, I mean, by doing so, can we harness the power of AI to facilitate the inclusive growth for development across Asia? And I think among those factors, I think languages are quite, important or matter in the Asia region, because for most Asia jurisdiction, we don't speak English, and for specific, we have their own languages, how to use, to train our data models to be representative of those languages. Probably, this is a good, research topic as well. Yes, I think that's all from me for this question. I will hand it back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for a really rich set of remarks. In particular, as you were mentioning, I think the need for thinking about non-legal challenges as well, such as language, and how frameworks in the policy and legal world can account for that. So really important point. And of course, thanks for laying out the legal landscape as well, with those specific examples that you raised about various governance frameworks and laws across the Asia Pacific. Final, but by no means last, but by no means the least speaker in this round, Mayan, who is the director of the Data Governance and Access Partnerships and Emeritus Director of the Asia Cloud Computing Association. She is Access Partnerships is a technology consultancy firm, and of course, Mayan has also worked before extensively on technology policy development, inclusive data governance, digital trade, emerging and frontier technologies, tech sustainability, and cybersecurity. She has worked with many global, regional, and local organizations such as APEC, ASEAN, PCC, Interpol, ICANN, the Council of Europe, UNIDID, which is United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, FELEBAN in Latin America, and the Asia Internet Coalition. So a lot of, again, diverse international organizations and across stakeholder groups as well. So again, maybe now that the first three speakers have provided their perspectives as well, what is given again the variety of hats that you wear and have worn, what is your overall assessment of this connection between data governance and AI, and the broad direction in which data governance is heading? So over to you, Mayan. Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you, Ajit, and welcome everybody to this discussion. I deal a lot with data, and I do think that one of my observations is that there have been a lot of opinions on how people are treating AI, what we should be doing with AI in Asia comparatively to the Western, I'm going to put that in inverted commas, to our Western counterparts. A very exciting event that's taking place very soon is going to be held in South Korea, isn't it? The AI Safety Summit, which is the second edition of where Bletchley Park originally started this whole discussion, where France decided, UK decided, let's come together and let's try to work out globally what we want to do with AI. Since that first initiation and that big sound and fury of everybody talking about AI regulation, here are some observations that I've made about how Asia has been moving with regard to AI and how the rest of the world has been moving to AI. Data point number one is that I'm not actually seeing an AI Act coming out in anybody in Asia. I think we have frameworks. I think we have guidelines. I think we have master plans. I think we have ideas. I think we have policies. I think that's the hardest that I've seen. I actually haven't seen a law. And I think that this is very, very specific. I'm going to drop a link into the chat, because this is an access alert that I wrote. If you scroll right down to the middle, I actually have an overall view of every ASEAN state and whatever AI regulation, legislation, and policy there. You'll see, and this is a little bit old because it's in January, but you'll see the words roadmap, strategy, action plan. You won't actually see a law. So that's the fact. Here's my opinion about it. I think, guys, Asia got a little bit burned by the GDPR. It was a little bit difficult to manage and put data governance on top of something as important as privacy. It caused a lot of lawyers to become very, very rich because everybody was doing privacy impact assessments, but it was hard to implement. And I think that because of that experience, I think a lot of Asia, at least within this is again an opinion, within Asia, I think a lot of governments and a lot of policymakers are saying, let's have a wait and see. Can we have a framework first? Can we talk about it first? So that's number one. The second thing, which is also very related to this opinion that I have, that I think a lot of Asian governments and legislators are a little bit wary of yet another GDPR if you're going to put some sort of governance on top of everything, is that we have challenges with the existing data policies, the existing data governance policies. I think Dr. Amora mentioned just now that a lot of people don't actually own their data. Dr. Pillin also mentioned that actually we do have some sort of difference in opinion between the West and what's happening in Asia. I think we haven't come to a good tipping point yet, or we haven't come to a point where we're actually willing to have a discussion at this point on what we want to do. Where I see, and this is an opinion again, where I see a lot of Asian governments focused on is innovation. Where I see a lot of Western governments coming from is control. Innovation and control are not meant to be on opposite sides of the force, but when you have something which is so noisy, which is so active, which is so changing, which is so variable, and which has so many risks, then they become really opposing forces, because one side wants to say, we have to empower our SMEs. We, as Asia, we have to come up with our global companies. We can't come up with global companies if we are going to continue to put restrictions down here and there that they can't move. We need to open that up. I haven't seen a proper discussion just yet of how to level that playing field for everybody. So those are some of the observations that I have. I do think that we do need to have some form of data governance discussion. I think that in Asia, there's a lot of opportunity. Why? Because I think I see a lot of people around Asia, young populations. Let's look at the demographics here. Young populations, adventurous with tools. We cannot stop the technology without stopping innovation. It is critical in Asia that we do get up to speed and have these discussions. But the way that I am seeing it, and again, these are coming back to facts, the way that I'm seeing how our governments are moving, not in terms of hard and fast regulations, but in terms of strategy and policy. I'll leave it as that. Back to you, Indrajit.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really, again, really rich framing of the regulatory landscape world over, and how Asia is engaging with it, and of course, a number of guidelines that you referred to. There's, I think, an ASEAN kind of guideline that recently that operates the kind of checklist for developers of AI to use as they see fit, and then there's Singapore's AI Verify as well, which again, as you rightly said, is basically a guideline that developers can use. And I think I want to follow up with you maybe in the next round on whether you what you think is the best approach, because there's a lot of conversation around this Anu Bradford's book, new book, Digital Empires, which kind of contrasts a US model to a EU model and to a China model, and then what would be the model that would work in most of Asia, I think, is a question that maybe I'll follow up with you on. But now I hope Amor is still with us, because I know she had to leave. Amor, are you still with us? Hopefully. Oh, fantastic. Yes. Great. So, okay, great. So, okay, fantastic. So maybe just, actually taking off from Mayan's really rich comments about, the enabling environment, the fact that some, as she said, the GDPR compliance may have, hit economies in Asia, hard potentially. So the question is, therefore, when we talk about data governance, there are often conditions that are presumed to exist, such as data access or the availability of data in digital formats, and it's presumed that these things are equitable, and the global majority can access these prerequisites equitably. Do you think that there are certain kind of even first order, before we come to the governance or the responsible AI questions, do you think there are first order things that are missing in terms of how we conceptualize data or data regulation globally? You've already spoken a little bit to that in the form of kind of inequities in terms of who owns the data, but to kind of take your comments to maybe a more global level, are there other inequities, asymmetries, other enabling conditions that we think exist but maybe don't? Over to you.
So one of the reasons why, so first and foremost is hearing from everyone. I hope you guys will share the recording. Bertrand, Natalia, and the rest of the Datasphere Initiative. Hearing from everyone, I know I'm with the right tribe. So thank you for putting this together. Second point, one of the reasons why we decided to organize ourselves in the global majority, the leaders of the global majority for digital economies, is because we're seeing this lopsided development. It's not just in AI, and it's not just in data governance, but even in terms of, say, for example, how startups are enabled, right? Or regulation are enabled, how governmental support is thrown. We recently were with the Prime Minister of Malaysia. They hosted what is a lead up to the ASEAN chairmanship of Malaysia for 2025. And they launched a 3 billion ringgit fund for startup enablement. Of course, a lot of it has to do with AI. And what I'm seeing now are certain regions are getting a lot of governmental support, a lot of private sector funding support. Where does that leave, for example, in ASEAN regions like Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, who rightly or wrongly are not giving the right kind of attention, right? In not just AI, but in a startup enablement and development. So if there was some way, so there are two things that I'd like to kindly ask from this group and would love to initiate a project with you. How do we get the leaders of the global majority, and we'll be more than happy to lend our network to this, to converge and converse with regards to how we can share best practices, right? So this could be something we can potentially do in Rio in July, inshallah. And so in the process, what we can do is exchange global best practices. That's number one. Second is, I will go back once again, Basujit, into the importance of leveling the playing field when it comes to access to digital tools that will allow people to own their own data. I cannot emphasize enough what I'm seeing in my region. I will not mention and prejudice the specific countries, but if there was some way we can give the power back or import or develop new technology similar to what India's doing, right? Because problem is we don't, most of the regions in our area don't even have a functioning national ID. I don't know, Basuji, if you're calling in from India, but India is like leaps and bounds ahead of everyone. So a national digital ID or the lowering of filters. So what makes a national ID difficult to implement? Usually it's the number of filters and the number of items that need to be entered. Maybe if it could be simplified so that it could be easier to roll out. And if India can do it, if Bharat can do it, so can the rest of the global majority. So simplification of the implementation of the national ID. And then second is, I strongly urge multilateral projects like that of the Global Sandbox Initiative to converge the leaders, so there could be an exchange among those of us in the global majority for best practices. Thank you.
Yeah, many thanks for those, again, really rich set of remarks. I'm not based in India right now. I was till a couple of months back, but of course familiar with Aadhaar and digital and the digital public infrastructure push that India kind of shepherded through the G20. I think that's another maybe discussion on the various perspectives, both within India, a separate panel discussion. But I think the larger point that you're making about the need for convergence in of course in terms of adopting a broad common position, but also a position that acknowledges the contextual differences within the global majority itself. So the idea that what works in the US or EU may not work in various parts of Asia is absolutely correct. But also what works in one part of Asia may not work in another Asian country. And I think so there is the need to have that conversation, to have that kind of common solidarity, but to also acknowledge important differences. So you really take your comments really well. So thanks for sharing that
Sorry,
perspective.
Basuji, one last thing.
Yeah.
We have to plan
Please,
for the weakest link in the chain, right? So I urge all those who are advanced to plan for the weakest link in the chain. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think I'm glad that you were able to make that intervention, because I think that's absolutely important, right? That the idea of, I think if you read the recent US digital strategy, it uses the phrase digital solidarity, which means something different. But I think this framing is really important. Maybe moving back to Vineet, taking off from your initial set of remarks, from your, again, both the kind of academic philosophy perspective and the UN perspective, what are the enabling conditions that you think do exist? What are the enabling conditions that we think exist but actually don't? Over to you.
Thank you so much. Let me stress on two things, and some of them are expanding from what Amor has just said now. I'd like to remind us, also that Asia Pacific represents 2/3 of the world's indigenous people. What that means, and Amor is for the Philippines. What that means is that the wealth of cultural diversity, of languages, of practices, of knowledge system that Asia Pacific represents is really extraordinary. Now, that is an enabling factor that is not yet, and I don't know how it will find its ways into the global data set that will be and should be feeding into the AI system and algorithm that will be used. And I'm stressing on the cultural diversity and indigenous knowledge system, because unless we tackle this from the national states, but also the regional bodies, it will not happen. We cannot expect, this rich cultural diversity to be seen and to be used at the global level by the new technologies without intentional policies behind it. So I do believe that an enabling factor in data governance in Asia Pacific is really to look at cultural diversity and indigenous people and communities very seriously. The second aspect which should be in place is, and to some extent also Amor has said, I would say deliberation instances or platforms or committees. It is extremely important that member states and governments create spaces, well, for good practices, sharing good practices, but also to just to check where is the people's and social understanding of the new technologies. I think it is extremely important for the governments now, as we speak, to set up national platforms to offer that kind of multi-stakeholder and multidisciplinary deliberations on what this new technology means for the different sectors, but also for the different groups of people that are either invisible or overexposed in the current system and technology. So for me, these two factors should really be addressed, at the national level and hopefully also at the regional level. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think your even in your last remark, you stressed on the kind of in this one, you stressed on the diversity of the region, but in your previous remark, you also stressed on the fact that the Asia Pacific will account for 50% of the world's GDP. So thanks for putting it into context, right? So over to Wayne, and I think there's some synergy between kind of your thinking on the diversity of languages in indigenous populations, and of course Wayne's previous remarks on languages. So I mean, same question to you: what are the enabling conditions? But just because there is this synergy between the two of your comments, if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on what you said about linguistic diversity. How is it a challenge? Are there legal frameworks we could use to maybe account for them? So over to you, Wayne. Thank you.
Sure. I think thank you for the question. Actually, I think from the public sector perspective, I think it's hard to harmonize a kind of global consensus so far. But after probably the AI Safety Summit, probably there will be some proposals. Why not? But from a sort of like a legal perspective, if we look at it, the cross-border data transfer. I mean, Asia countries have their own model, right? Contract. I think this is kind of very contractual approach to sort of governing artificial intelligence. I mean, just a very quick, response to the previous the previous discussion, and for the linguistic issues, I think somehow data needs to be digitalized and available in sort of like machine readable formats. So machine readability, doesn't necessarily related to languages or linguistic issues. So in this regard, we can facilitate or harmonize or coordinate the machine readability of data, of training data, to enable AI. But as far as I know, many organizations, particularly in developing countries or global majority, may still rely on the catalog data. In this regard, it's sort of like probably hindering the AI adoptions. And also, we have to enable a robust data infrastructure, including, for example, representative databases, data warehouses or data centers or even APIs. Under the API protocols, those data infrastructure is super, essential for example, storing, processing, or analyzing large volumes of data. To be compatible with the AI capacities. And finally, I think they probably some common data standards or formats are important for facilitating the interoperability of data sharing as well. To enable AI development at a scale. Last but not least, some secure, data sharing frameworks such as the sharing agreements, like I've mentioned, that the contract approaches to solving this language or linguistical issues. And some open data initiatives, even if we look at it in UK, they have that data trusts. Those initiatives with the flexibility can be somehow necessary enable organizations or entity to access and share data for AI development while still protecting privacy and even IP rights. Yes, I think that's all from me.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, a lot of competing interests, and looking forward to your research on how you're kind of maybe reconciling some of these different push and pull in terms of developing a legal framework that might work in some of these areas. So thank you. To Mian, again, same question on kind of the enabling conditions that you think exist from the perspective of various stakeholder groups, but actually also had a follow-up on your previous comment on the AI Safety Summit and your overall assessment of that, because there has been some criticism, not criticism, but some commentary saying that ultimately it's just a statement. There's no binding obligation that comes from it. It's just a kind of political posturing. If that doesn't, if the summit declaration doesn't actually convert into law, then is there any point to it? And that's been some of the kind of commentary on the Bletchley Park summit, at least. And I wanted to also, in addition to, of course, this enabling condition question, I wanted to get your take on where you really see this AI safety process heading, because now it's, of course, it's going to be in South Korea now. And what do you think is the value of this AI safety process? So if you could shed some light on that, I think that will be of great interest to me, and I hope to the audience as well. Thank you.
Thank you. AI is a technology that is an enabler. It is lived horizontally. Policies and governments live and implement policies vertically. That's really tricky to manage. And I think that that's something that we are in the process of figuring out. I've just put a big note in the chat actually about this process of figuring out. I think that there is a message that I personally would love to see a little bit more of. I think Bertrand and I have always been on internet governance panels, and we talk about the splinter net and the fear of fragmentation. For AI, I'm going to reverse my position a little bit, because I feel that we need to highlight to people in general not to be too afraid of heterogeneity. There is this great rush always that we want to harmonize, we want to equalize everything. We want to have one size fits all policies because it's easier after all, right? We can have, I mean, I mentioned it just now, if we can have GDPR, yes, let's have the GDPR. If we can have one AI rule for everybody, why don't we just do that? I think that we can start right now, because we're just starting the discussion about AI. Can we start by acknowledging inclusion at this point? Can we put all the cards on the table? It actually does mean heterogeneity. It actually does mean that we might need to have a little bit of fragmentation while individual teams, individual groups, individual countries, individual universities, individual industry groups figure out what this means for them. What do I mean by this? Okay, let's just look at it, a publisher, for example. We talked a little bit just now about local languages. If you're a company that's building an LLM and you want to say, hey, I want to go into this country, let's say Cambodia, to talk about building LLM and including Cambodian language, well, you might actually need to go to the news agency, but the news agency might be like, well, this is actually copyrighted data, we're not quite sure, can you pay for it because this is normally what you do? So there are all these things, and that's just one industry. If you're the government, you've got to deal with a lot of different things, like we need to actually digitize things. So AI as an enabler, it's lived horizontally. What do we need? What are the conditions that are needed generally? Number one, you need digitized data. You need that data to be digitized. No more red chalk of this, no more rubber stamping, no more wet ink signatures. Needs to be digitized. Do you have the legislation to allow for digital signatures, for example? You need the machine, you need the AI machine to actually do that, whatever it is that you're building. You need the question. What are you asking the machine to give you? Then you need to assess, you need a way to assess if that question is truly answered or not. Then you need a way to uncover or cover if you should be asking that question in the first place. So I think that we have a lot to do. There's it's not just one thing, because we talked about Aadhaar just now, and we talked about the fact that a lot of governments don't have a national ID in place just yet. Wow, you got to go all the way back there. I think that there are a lot of enabling factors that we need to look at, a lot of conditions that we need to look at. But we can't be afraid of moving in this particular direction, and we can't be afraid of letting people try different things. And that's the heterogeneity that I was speaking about. The other things that I'll just put on the table before I turn the time back to you is that we're looking at things like digitized data, asking the questions, regulations. That's very much government and policy based. What about the people? Because we haven't even gone and unpacked this idea of digital literacy just yet. We haven't unpacked the idea of, you have this law. What about the law enforcement guys? Do they know how to be putting in law? Do they know how to enforce this law? Because a law that's unenforceable might as well just not be a law. So I'll park all of that there, because those are two other really, really big portions of discussion. Back to you.
Fantastic. Many thanks again for rounding up this segment of the conversation with some really rich examples. We have about, I think, just over 25 minutes left, and we do want about 15 minutes for a discussion. So please request all the participants to please start thinking of questions, maybe start posting them in the chat so that we have time for that. But in the last kind of 10 minutes, I would request all the panelists to maybe, because this is the last kind of round, is to pick, and I think we've already been doing that a little bit, to maybe pick in a couple of minutes one or two best practices from the region that you think could be of use to practitioners and thinkers all around the world. So I think there was, of course, Aadhaar and DPI thrown around. Is there a digital literacy initiative in a country or a group of countries that's working particularly well? So if I can request all the panelists to maybe just very quickly in the next 10 minutes pick up on one or two initiatives that they think are working in Asia, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. As I said, please do start thinking about questions that you want to throw onto the floor. So Amor, please, over to you. Over to you first. I think she is maybe on her phone, so I'm not sure if she can hear us. But maybe if Amor is not available, then perhaps maybe over to Fineet, if that's okay.
Yes, Basu, with pleasure. Let me just stick to one point. I wanted to share with you an initiative now focusing on Southeast Asia and ASEAN in particular. And I'm very glad that Me'an, but also Amor are also from the region, Southeast Asia, I mean. I'd like to just inform everybody that, as a UN agency, it is important, very important for us that the global framework that member states adopt, within the UN instances and conferences and platforms, they are now translated into the local environment. And this is happening now because I mentioned when I started that the member states have adopted the UNESCO Global Recommendation on Ethics of AI back in 2021. And that was really the first ever global UN framework focusing on ethics of AI in particular. And I'm very happy to report now that the ASEAN countries, nearly the 10 of them, are now deploying the AI ethics readiness assessment that UNESCO is conducting. So this year, 2024, nearly the 10 countries of ASEAN will deploy that readiness assessment and will come out with some gaps and also baseline data on how the countries have prepared themselves, not for AI in general, but to make sure that AI is used, developed, deployed in an ethical manner, abiding by the global standards that have been adopted, in the recommendation. So this is something that I wanted to mention as a good practice in this particular region, because we are starting to see, let's say 3 years down the line, application of global frameworks into national environment. And last point is to say this is also in complement and in alignment with the ASEAN Guide on AI governance and ethics that has been adopted last February. So I start to see in Southeast Asia a lot of alignment, from global, national, and regional undertaking and framework to really produce baseline studies, identify gaps, and come up with recommendations to member states. Now, I also understand May-Ann Lim when she said, in this particular region, we don't have any acts yet, no hard law at the moment. So I hope that in the coming years, we will also tend to that standards. But at the moment, I just feel as a UN perspective that there is a positive dynamics, in translating the global standards into the national settings. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. We were also starting to get some questions in the chat, which is fantastic. So maybe because also we are coming to the end of the time, so maybe we can, when we turn to the panelists also, please feel free to address any of the questions that you think you find of interest. So Wayne, I'll turn to you next, but so we have a question from Alia Shadad about about kind of fostering more global South partnerships. So in addition to the general question about best practices that are working, do you have any kind of sense from your research on ways in which we can actually foster more global South partnerships? Wayne, over to you.
Sure. Thank you for this fantastic question. I mean, working on global North doesn't necessarily mean that it's harmful to work on global South. I think I mean that's a very quick response. And I have another quick response about the statement that there is no hard law in Asia in terms of AI governance, but in China there is. They instrument measures on generative AI already, so, and it's a harder law for sure. But it sort of follows the Chinese previous approaches to regulating. I mean, for example, the content moderation system, but currently in China, even we have the two comprehensive legislative proposals already, and I'm collaborating one proposal, that legislative proposal, that's the model artificial intelligence law. You can and we make it public access online. You can search on Google even, and the model AI law. In that sense, that I mean, it's kind of experimental approach to framing the AI governance, because we, the main I mentioned that no law enforcement, there is no hard law. But actually, we would like to experiment upon this sort of hard law approaches to identify when the hard law may fail, so that we can still implement a lot of soft law, like the ethical codes, I mean, to help address the AI governance issues. And for some specific, cases studying Asia, I think I would just go back to that global North or global South issue. I think if we look at that cross-border data flow again, we have that data adequacy, issue. Starting from, for example, GDPR. And then now a lot of, probably at present in Asia region, we only have the South Korean or something. They reach that adequacy of data protection in terms of GDPR. So yeah, in this regard, I think we have to do some more sort of community engagements. To not only working with private sector or something, and it's also we have to get those public sector involved to clarify rules. To beat consensus in terms of global North and global South. For example, that's the data adequacy is a very typical case in this regard. Yes, I think that's a very quick response as well, and I will get it back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe some last comments from Mayan as well. In particular, very rich comment in the chat from David. So Mayan, over to you. Generally on best practices that you think work, but also if you would like to respond a little bit or add to David's very rich comment as well. Thanks.
Final comments on AI. I feel that what we're discussing is not just AI, but really culture. Different people will have different positions on data privacy, for example. And I made this point when we were already discussing data privacy. What one country, or what forget about countries, what one person views as data privacy may not gel with what I view as privacy. I might be very happy to have my pictures exposed to everybody. I don't mind. But that's why we moved away, and we had to remember the whole world had to go through this thinking. We had to move away from data privacy law to data protection law. And not a lot of people realize this. People just say, oh, data privacy and protection. But no, one's a philosophical concept. One is actually just protection of the data. We don't really care what data it is, but we're just going to put protections around it. I think that we're going to need to do that also for ethics around AI, because it's really around how we're treating different people. How are we treating this data? Should we be asking the question, as I mentioned earlier? I think that there are areas where which we can also question I think David mentioned colonialism and post-colonialism and cultural diversity. I think that we do want to be focused on ourselves in the first instance. We don't need to make the other the enemy. But I think that we should be a little bit more forthright in saying that I think that this is the way that we want to treat each other when it comes to culture, when it comes to AI, when it comes to questioning things around technology. So like I mentioned, and I will continue to say, I think that we need to give each of ourselves, each of us, a little bit of space to figure it out, whether it's by country, whether it's by industry, whether it's by sector, it doesn't really matter. I think we need to give ourselves a little bit of space. Let's not rush to regulate just yet. I think that we can talk about it. And that's why I'm actually quite glad to be, honestly speaking, I'm quite glad to be part of Asia, because we've got frameworks and discussions. We're not actually like going forward, just saying that, no, we've got to have an act right now. I'm quite enjoying the discussion. I'm quite enjoying the fact that we are pinging against each other and working out that we're not quite the same. I think not just quite yet. And I'm looking forward to where we're going to be taking each other as we push each other towards thinking better.
Thanks, man. Bertrand, over to you for some questions or remarks.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very interesting exchange. I have a few quick questions that are lingering in the back of my head. There's one element which is, I wouldn't say the elephant in the room, but I would be very happy to have some thoughts from the panel and maybe other participants on what is the impact on China's position regarding AI and AI regulation and data regulation in the region? How is it perceived, and how do you see the capacity of reconciling basically what the approaches are in Europe or the US with China? And actually, this can go for an organization like UNESCO, which has a view of how the position can be taken there. The second thing is, and these are very quick questions, it could be a long discussion, but just a quick feedback to nurture the further discussions. The second one is, there's the whole debate about the pros and cons of open sourcing AI, like making the models completely available. Is there a sense or positions within within Asia or among different countries in Asia regarding this debate? Because there are really pros and cons. There is no simple answer to those things. Any hint of how the debate is shaping in the region would be useful. And the final element, I found fascinating the discussion about the linguistic diversity, which is a huge challenge. It was already a challenge for search engines. It was a challenge for a lot of things. And Mayan was using the expression that AI is a horizontal technology. Actually, whenever we talk about something that is horizontal, we talk about layers. And AI is a layer on top of layers, etc. And one of the big challenges is that the lack of sufficient layers below is a very big hindrance. So how to ensure that, particularly connecting this to a very concrete question, which is the fight in the US around copyright protection for instance, newspapers. I mean, there are lawsuits against OpenAI from the New York Times and others. And in the Goldilocks approach that I was mentioning at the beginning, we obviously cannot say no access to this information at any cost because it's completely copyrighted, and it cannot be completely free for all either, for all the reasons we understand. Is there a particular perception regarding the availability of, for instance, local newspapers for training AI? Because in most cases, in the local languages, it is an invaluable resource. So quickly, China, open source, and copyright and access to data. It doesn't have to be a long answer, but is there a sense? that is
many thanks, Bertrand. I think we're at the stage of the panel where the richness of the discussion is inversely proportional to the amount of time that we have left.
Absolutely.
So I wish we had, much more time to discuss. So just a quick housekeeping note. We'll go maybe a few minutes over if that's okay with the participants, because we also have Rachel Adams who's going to deliver a fantastic closing, I'm sure. So maybe I'll turn quickly. So Bertrand, a lot of really important questions on the table. Each of those could be a discussion in their own right, but quickly to turn to all the panelists one by one to take as many questions as they can that Bertrand raised, maybe a minute each, and then we'll turn over to Rachel for the closing. So starting again with maybe with Wayne, because I know Wayne had a hard stop. So maybe with Wayne, and then we'll go to Fineet and Mayan, if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure. I think some quick comments. I mean, even to respond to the question there. I mean, China, open source, and even copyright. I think the three issues are relevant to my own research, because in China, at least in our legislative proposal, we define that open source AI. I mean, to sort of like arrange the liabilities. I mean, of the different stakeholders in artificial intelligence, so AI providers or AI users or AI developers. I think in this regard, open source is highly relevant. I mean, in the context of AI, highly relevant with the liability issue. If we talk about, hard law or regulation. And the open source ISO is also defining the version of open source AI. I think it's already near to the end, nearly to finishing the discussion. But they have that version 0.6 or something. So you can have a quick look at that their discussion as well. At an open source initiative, it's an international initiative. And in terms of copyright, still, I think contract approaches like the different licensing systems, like Creative Commons, but Creative Commons lacks in the AI cloud. In its tests, and the Open Real, the responsible AI license. We have a lot of licensing systems online already. Available there, but it still can't. It's not compulsory. It's not mandatory, and probably we can facilitate or identify. If they are best practices for the time being. Yeah.
Thanks, Wayne. Rapid fire response. Fineet, over to you.
Just 2 points on China and I would say international geopolitics. Just a hint into this question. The USA were, as you may know, out of UNESCO for the last 10 years. And they came back as a member state to UNESCO last July 2023. One reason is because they want to be part of this global conversation on ethics of AI. So this is just a hint to say, indeed, we need a lot more of international fora for these conversations to happen, especially because we are in a quite intense conflictuality era as we speak today. So Bertrand, I would definitely agree with you that looking at Asia and Asia Pacific and Southeast Asia, China will remain a reference for many countries. And I think we need, as a UN, to offer instances of deliberations for this to happen in a effective way. On open sources, open data, I just want to share that UNESCO has been a very, very big advocate for open science, for instance. Open science, we've seen the result of open science during the COVID-19 and the quest for the new vaccines. That was made possible only because of the open science policy that was enforced at that time. So I want to believe that a formula would also work for open data for governance data by AI. And I want to believe that we would also be smart and agile to find such a way to use that openness of data for the common good. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mayan. Final thoughts.
Just to help everybody, my final thoughts are also in the chat. Number one, China. Did you know that China's regulation is actually rights-based? I think a lot of people actually don't know this. And a lot of people will be very surprised to find that it is actually rights-based. Who would have thought? Secondly, have you actually used Chinese AI? I have. Okay, it's really, really good. It's already on phones. Also, just for consideration, as an industry, Huawei has just announced that it will be moving completely to Harmony OS next year. No more Android. So I don't know what this will have an impact on how China and its country will be using AI, but basically it's a watch this space. That's going to be a huge move because Harmony OS has had a couple of years already to develop. Secondly, on open source and sorry, not versus training data, ignore the training, but just on open source. Closed source is inclusive. Sorry, open source is inclusive for everyone, but has the usual challenges of free and open source. Basically, nobody's managing it, etc. I'm sorry, I obviously was typing very, very fast. So open source is inclusive, okay? Has the usual challenges for open source. Nobody's taking a look at it. No, it's always the hobbyists that are keeping it alive. And I think that we have quite a lot of people in Asia Pacific, because I think Bertrand was asking what's the take from that. I think that we do have a lot of hobbyists. I think I'm not too sure. I actually don't think there's a cultural or a country angle to this. I just think that free and open source software will always have problems for free and open source software. So that's one. And the third thing is that training data and copyright, it's actually core to the AI ethics. For example, if you use an AI machine that has used, for example, Books2 LLM for training, Books2 has a large base, and everybody knows this, of pirate data. Are you going to say, oh, you know what? Oh, well, can't help it. I'm just going to continue to use this particular AI machine. Or are you going to, on principle, say, no, we're not going to be using this particular machine on principle? But it's already been done, because remember, nobody's going to go in and say, I'm going to untrain this data, I'm going to retrain it, because that's going to waste of time. Really big questions for us. Don't have the answers, but I think that they're worth asking for. Copyright is massively, massively important. I do think that the future is going to be sitting with a lot of companies that have not quite yet monetized their databases. And I'm looking at companies like Getty Images, for example, people who are selling big databases, libraries. In fact, Library of Congress has lots of information. I mean, how are we going to be getting hold of all of that data? How are we going to be using that data for the public good? Or are we going to be closing it up and saying that no? Or are we going to be monetizing it and saying, yes, you can use it, but just pay a copyright fee? I think that for content creators, this is sort of like the moment that everybody has been waiting for. Finally, somebody pays me for my content. Who knows how this is going to be developed, but I think that this is a very good question for us to be asking right now.
Many thanks. I think Amor wanted to come back in on one question just before I hand over to Rachel. Amor, very quickly on the question regarding the Global South, if you can hear us.
Actually, it's more of an action step. I know we're running out of time. I would be more than happy to host the members. We will be having a global majority meetup on digital economies in November 2024 in Manila. And I would like to make this an open call for everyone in the Datasphere Initiative. We'd love to host you guys here, because the question basically was, the divides are based on global north determination. Well, that's why we decided to band together. It doesn't mean that North America or Europe is not part of it. As a matter of fact, part of our board are from there, and we'd love to see you all. That's all I want to say. See you. We'd love to host you, Datasphere Initiative in Manila, for Asia Pacific meetup. November 2024. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's it from me. Really privileged to see this lineup. Equally privileged to hand the floor to Rachel Adams, who is the project lead and principal investigator of the Global Index on Responsible AI. So doing a lot of really important work that speaks to a lot of things we've discussed. Rachel, thanks a lot for making it today. Over to you to close the session and really provide some takeaways for all the participants. Thanks a lot, Rachel. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I feel really, really privileged to have come in and listened to such a rich and interesting discussion. I sit very much on the African continent and listen to what's often a very kind of mixed and diverse set of discussions about where we sit continentally in relation to the rest of the world. And I think that similar trends and issues were coming up about the importance of highlighting cultural and linguistic diversity and the heterogeneity of different responses to artificial intelligence and data governance and the challenges they pose. So this has been so insightful for me. I think from my side, we're at a really pivotal moment. We have in the room Learn Asia and Bazate, who have been really important partners to us as we've developed the Global Index on Responsible AI, which measures countries' commitments and progress in national AI ecosystems in 138 countries around the world. It's coming out on June the 13th. I must say the Asia region was incredibly interesting with very different levels and very different kinds of activities across all the different countries. But one thing I do want to echo is I hope that's an important starting point to help diversify global debates and discussions around responsible AI and ethical AI in data governance by having that kind of easy to understand comparative data around where different countries are at. And just a kind of quick insight, I don't want to say too much, but one of the really important findings was around the role of UNESCO and the role of international cooperation as this really, really important foundation for working together. And I really agree with the conversations around working together does not mean we all do the same thing in the same way, but recognize and support the different ways in which different countries and different cultural contexts need to respond to very different kinds of dynamics, but to support each other to do that in ways that help bridge what is a really immense global digital and AI divide. So I look forward to further conversations. I look forward to thinking about how the experiences on the African continent bear so many similarities and are also different in different ways to the conversations in the Asia region, and how we can really come together as the majority world to bring a different set of experiences and understandings about what inequality really means and really looks like, and how it really needs to be tackled as we advance with these different data, datafication and digitalization agendas the world over. So thank you, Datasphere. Thank you to all the panelists. This was a wonderful, wonderful discussion.
Okay,
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Thanks for the invitation, Rachel.
thank you.